The fence wasn't just expensive. It was perfect. And that was exactly the problem, because when Ryan saw it standing on the boundary of his land, something felt wrong, and what he would discover next would change everything. For years, Ryan had lived quietly on his property, a peaceful stretch of land just outside a growing suburban neighborhood. He wasn't the type to get involved in disputes. He kept to himself, respected boundaries, and expected the same in return. So when he returned from a short trip and saw a brand new luxury fence running along the edge of his land, he paused. It wasn't just any fence. It was tall, polished, carefully designed, clearly expensive. The kind of structure someone builds with confidence. But the placement felt off. Ryan walked closer, studying the line where the fence met the ground. Something didn't match his memory. He had walked that boundary dozens of times. Measured it. Maintained it. This line wasn't right. Across the fence, his neighbor stood proudly, admiring the build like it was a statement. No hesitation. No doubt, Ryan didn't speak at first. He simply looked at the fence again, because deep down, a quiet thought had already formed. What if this wasn't just a mistake? Ryan approached calmly, not wanting to jump to conclusions. He believed in simple conversations before conflict. Looks like you've been busy, he said, nodding toward the fence. The neighbor smiled, confident and relaxed. Had to upgrade. HOA approved everything. That word approved hung in the air like a final answer. Ryan asked gently about the boundary. Not accusing, just clarifying. But the response came quickly, almost rehearsed. It's exactly where it's supposed to be. No hesitation. No doubt, Ryan nodded, but inside, the uncertainty didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. Because something about the certainty didn't match the reality he remembered. Later that evening, he walked the line again. Slowly this time. Carefully. Counting steps. Noticing landmarks. The old tree. The slope in the ground. The small rock formation he had always used as a reference point. The fence didn't align with any of it. It wasn't slightly off, it was clearly shifted. Ryan stopped halfway down the line, staring at the structure as the sun dipped behind it. This wasn't a small misunderstanding, this was a boundary being moved, and if that was true, then someone had just taken part of his land. The next morning, Ryan pulled out his property documents. Old surveys, maps, measurements, all carefully stored over the years. He spread them across his table, comparing lines, angles, distances. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The fence wasn't on the boundary. It was inside it, his land, but paper alone wasn't enough. Not for something this serious, so Ryan made a decision. He contacted a professional surveyor. Someone neutral. Someone precise. Days later, the survey team arrived. Equipment set up. Markers placed. Measurements taken with quiet accuracy. The process was calm, almost routine. But for Ryan, every step carried weight. The neighbor watched from a distance. Arms crossed. Still confident. Still certain. Hours passed. Lines were drawn. Points were marked. And finally, the surveyor approached Ryan with the results. There was no hesitation this time. The fence, he said, pointing clearly, is over the boundary. Ryan exhaled slowly. Not surprised, but now it was real. The truth wasn't a feeling anymore, it was confirmed, and as the neighbor stepped closer, asking for the results, the moment shifted, because what came next wouldn't just settle a dispute, it would expose something much bigger. The results were shared calmly, professionally, without emotion. But the impact was immediate. The fence, the expensive structure built with full confidence, stood clearly on Ryan's land. Not by inches, but by feet. The neighbor's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough to reveal doubt. This must be wrong, they said quietly, but the surveyor didn't waver. Every measurement was verified. Every line confirmed. Ryan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, letting the facts speak for themselves. But something else began to surface in that moment. The neighbor mentioned the HOA approval again. Permits, plans, confirmations. Everything had been reviewed and signed off. Ryan's attention shifted. If the fence was wrong, and the HOA approved it, then the issue wasn't just between neighbors anymore, it was bigger, much bigger, and as Ryan looked back at the fence, he realized something important. This wasn't just about reclaiming space, it was about uncovering how something so obvious had been allowed in the first place, and that question was about to lead somewhere no one expected. Ryan brought the survey results to the HOA meeting. Not to create conflict, but to find answers. The room felt different that evening. Quieter. More attentive. Documents were placed on the table. Lines, measurements, confirmations all clear. The board reviewed everything carefully. But the more they looked, the more the confusion grew, because according to their records, the fence placement had been approved based on submitted plans that didn't match reality. Somewhere between approval and construction, the boundary had shifted, but how, and more importantly, why hadn't it been verified? Residents began asking questions. Not aggressively, but firmly. The system that once felt reliable now showed cracks. Small ones, but visible. Ryan sat quietly, watching the discussion unfold. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about trust, because if something like this could happen once, what else had been overlooked? And as the meeting continued, one thing became clear: this situation wasn't ending with a simple correction, it was about to change how everything worked. The following days brought unexpected momentum. The HOA launched a full review process. Not just for the fence, but for all recent approvals. What they found wasn't dramatic, but it was enough: small inconsistencies, minor oversights, assumptions made without full verification. Individually, they seemed harmless. As together, they revealed a pattern. The system wasn't broken, but it wasn't as precise as everyone believed. The board responded quickly. New procedures. Verified surveys. Mandatory checks before approvals. The neighbor, now fully aware of the situation, agreed to correct the mistake. The fence would be adjusted. Properly aligned, no argument. No resistance, just acceptance. Ryan watched it all unfold with quiet clarity. This wasn't about winning, it was about setting something right, and as the fence began to come down, piece by piece, he realized something unexpected. The real impact of this situation wasn't the land, it was the change it created, because sometimes, a single line can reveal everything that's been overlooked. Weeks later, the fence stood again, but this time, it was exactly where it belonged. The line was clear. The space was respected. And the tension that once filled the air had faded into something quieter. The neighborhood felt different now. Not less structured, but more aware. Approvals meant more. Verification mattered. And assumptions were no longer enough. Ryan walked along the boundary one last time, stopping where the old misalignment had once stood. It looked simple now. Obvious, but he knew how easily it had gone unnoticed. The neighbor nodded to him from across the fence. No words needed. Just understanding, because in the end, this wasn't a story about conflict. It was about clarity, about how one small shift can change everything, and how the truth, when finally seen, has a way of putting everything back in place. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.